The Kazan Galactic Empire's mandate was clear: pay tribute or be annihilated. But the humans of Earth sent a resounding message back in the rusted hulls of their ancient fleet. Subjugation was not an option. Admiral Stephen Perry stood on the bridge of his flagship, the TDN Indefatigable, a relic from the early days of humanity's expansion into the stars. Around him, a ragtag flotilla of ships just as old and battle-scarred prepared for the fight of their lives. When the Kazon ultimatum had arrived, demanding regular tithes from Earth lest they face destruction, Perry had been the loudest voice of defiance. The Kazon, led by the ruthless Emperor Hydrus, controlled a vast swath of the galaxy and viewed humans as just another primitive species to be brought to heel. But Perry knew something the Kazon did not. In the mothballed shipyards of Earth lay the reserve fleet, warships from an era when humanity had to fight tooth and nail for every foothold in the cosmos. Built to wage war and weather the worst the universe could throw at them, these vessels boasted robust weapons and defenses that could still pack a punch. Convincing Earth's leaders to refuse the Kazon demands had been one thing. Persuading them to crew the relics with veterans and send them to face down a technologically superior foe had been a harder sell. But Perry believed in the tenacity and grit of his people. If the Kazon wanted a fight, he would bring one to their doorstep. Now, as the human ships neared the Kazonian border, the true scale of their audacious gambit became clear. Sensor scans showed hundreds of sleek, deadly enemy warships waiting for the paltry Terran fleet, their weapons primed and ready. Aboard the Indefatigable, Perry watched the tactical displays with a sense of grim determination. The future of free humanity hung in the balance. If they failed here, the Kazan Armada would descend on Earth and reduce it to cinders. As the two fleets closed to weapons range, Perry felt a strange calm settle over him. He knew the odds were stacked against them, but he also knew the caliber of those who crewed these ships. They would not go quietly into the night. He opened a fleet-wide channel, his voice steady. All ships, power up your weapons and prepare to engage. We'll show these Kazon bastards what happens when you back humanity into a corner. Good hunting. The battle was about to begin, and the Terrans were ready to unleash hell. In the face of galactic tyranny, they would stand firm, united and unafraid. For Earth, for freedom, they would fight to the last. The moment the human fleet engaged the Kazon Armada, the disparity in technology became painfully clear. Kazon energy beams carved through the ancient hulls of the human ships, slicing them open and venting atmosphere and crew into the void. The human vessels returned fire, their railguns and missiles slamming into the Kazan ships' shields with little effect. On the bridge of the Indefatigable, alarms blared as consoles exploded in showers of sparks. Admiral Perry squeezed the armrests of his chair as the deck shuddered beneath him. "Damage report," he barked. "Heavy damage to decks 7 through 12, an officer shouted over the chaos. "Engines are offline, and weapons are barely functioning." Perry watched in horror as the Kazon weapons tore through his fleet, reducing ships to drifting hulks one by one. It was a slaughter, and he knew they couldn't last much longer. "Admiral, we've lost the Defiant and the Valiant," another officer reported, his voice strained. Perry made a split-second decision. "All ships, execute Emergency Jump Protocol Alpha," he ordered over the fleet-wide channel. "We'll regroup at the pre-designated coordinates." As the battered human ships struggled to escape, the Kazon pressed their advantage, hammering the fleeing vessels with relentless fire. But one by one, the human ships winked out of existence as their hyperdrives engaged, leaving only debris and the dead behind. In a remote sector of space, the remnants of the human fleet emerged from hyperspace, their ships scarred and limping. Perry took stock of the situation, his heart sinking as he realized the extent of their losses. More than half the fleet was gone, and the surviving ships were in rough shape. On the bridge of the Indefatigable, the mood was grim. Crew members tended to the wounded and put out fires, their faces etched with despair. Many openly wept, while others stared blankly at the view screens, numb with shock. Perry knew he had to act fast. Morale was crumbling, and some were already whispering about surrender. He called up the ship's historical archives, searching for anything that could give them an edge. As he pored over the records, a glimmer of an idea took shape. In Earth's early days of space exploration, human ships had used the gravitational pull of nebulae and other anomalies to set up ambushes and even the odds against superior foes. Perry studied the star maps, locating a nearby nebula with the right properties. If he could lure the Kazan fleet inside, the nebula's swirling gravity wells and radiation could disrupt their sensors and shields, giving the human ships a fighting chance. He opened a channel to Emperor Hydras's flagship, his voice dripping with disdain. "Emperor Hydras, I see you needed an entire armada to face a handful of ancient human ships. Where's the honor in that? If you have any courage, you'll follow us into the Scaros Nebula for a final battle, just your fleet against mine." Perry cut the transmission, hoping his taunt would goad the arrogant Emperor into pursuing them. He knew it was a desperate gamble, but it was their only chance. As the human ships limped towards the nebula, Perry gathered his remaining officers to explain his plan. They would rig their ship's reactors to overload, turning each vessel into a massive guided bomb. When the Kazan fleet followed them into the nebula, they would detonate their ships in the midst of the enemy, using the nebula's gravitational currents to amplify the blasts. It was a suicide mission, and Perry made sure every crew member understood the stakes. To a man, they volunteered, ready to sacrifice everything to save Earth from Kazan tyranny. As the human fleet neared the nebula, sensors detected the Kazan armada in pursuit, with Emperor Hydras's ship at the vanguard. Perry smiled grimly, knowing his gambit had worked. The human ships plunged into the swirling depths of the Scaros Nebula, their hulls groaning as the gravitational currents buffeted them. The Kazan fleet followed close behind, their sleek ships cutting through the nebula's haze. Deep within the nebula, the human crews made their final preparations, setting their reactors to overload. Perry gave the order, his voice steady over the comm. "All ships, commence attack Plan Omega. It's been an honor serving with you all." As one, the human vessels charged the Kazan fleet, their reactors howling as they pushed beyond safety limits. The Kazan ships opened fire, but the nebula's radiation rendered their targeting systems nearly useless. The first human ship reached the Kazan line and detonated, its reactor releasing the energy of a small sun. The blast tore through the nearest Kazan ships, the shockwave amplified by the nebula's roiling currents. More human ships followed, each one plowing into the Kazan fleet before erupting in a cataclysmic blast. The nebula lit up with the fury of 1,000 suns as the chain reaction of detonations ripped through the Kazan armada. Perry watched from the bridge of the Indefatigable as his ship hurtled towards Emperor Hydras's flagship. Alarms screamed and bulkheads buckled around him, but he felt a sense of calm purpose. This was humanity's stand against the dark, their defiance of tyranny's yoke. The Indefatigable collided with Hydras's ship, and Perry closed his eyes as the reactor reached critical mass. In a blinding flash of light and fire, the two ships vanished, consumed by the unforgiving nuclear inferno. When the maelstrom finally subsided, the once mighty Kazan fleet was a shattered ruin, its ships torn apart by the relentless detonations. Only a handful of battered vessels remained, limping away in shocked retreat. The human fleet was gone, sacrificed in the pyre of battle. But their courage and willpower had struck a blow against the Kazan that would resound through the ages. Earth would have time to prepare for the coming storm, thanks to the bravery of Admiral Perry and his intrepid crews. The battered remnants of Earth's fleet limped back to their homeworld, victory hard won but at a terrible cost. As news of Admiral Stephen Perry's sacrifice spread, a wave of grief and pride swept across humanity. His final stand in the Scaros Nebula became the stuff of legend, whispered in bars and taught in classrooms. Jack Perry stood at attention during his father's memorial, face hardened as he fought back tears. The loss cut deep, but it also ignited a fire within him. He enlisted in the Terran Space Navy the very next day. "I'm here to serve, sir," Jack said, his voice steady as he faced the recruiter. The older man studied him. "You've got big shoes to fill, son." Jack nodded. "I know, I intend to." Over the next few years, Jack threw himself into his training with relentless drive. He excelled in tactics simulations, outmaneuvering instructors in ways that left them shaking their heads in disbelief. "He's got his father's mind for strategy," one officer remarked. "But there's something more there, a spark of brilliance all his own." Jack's rise through the ranks was meteoric. By the time he reached his late 20s, he commanded his own ship, the TSS Defiant. His crew admired him not just for his tactical acumen, but for his ability to inspire loyalty and courage in those under his command. Meanwhile, Earth's shipyards hummed with activity as the Terran Space Navy rebuilt. Engineers pored over salvaged Kazon technology, integrating it into human designs. New ships rolled out of dry dock, overflowing with weapons that melded human ingenuity with alien power. But the newfound hope was shattered when a stealth probe returned from Kazon space with disturbing footage. Emperor Hydrus, scarred but very much alive, stood before a massive gathering of Kazon warriors. "The humans think they have won a great victory," Hydrus snarled, his voice crackling through the audio feed. "We will show them the true meaning of war. We will not rest until their world burns and their species is wiped from existence." The Kazon roared their approval, weapons raised high. In a secure briefing room, Jack Perry watched the footage with a group of high-ranking officers. The mood was grim. "Even with our upgrades, we can't hope to match their full fleet," one admiral said, shaking his head. Jack leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Then we don't try to match them. We cut off the head of the snake." He laid out his plan, a small team of elite operatives, striking deep into Kazon territory to eliminate Hydrus himself. "It's suicide," someone muttered. Jack's voice was steel. "My father proved that sometimes that's what it takes." The mission was greenlit. Jack handpicked his team, the best of the best. They trained relentlessly, pushing the limits of their new stealth tech and weapons. The night before deployment, Jack stood alone on the observation deck of his ship, staring out at the stars. He pulled out an old holopic of his father and studied it. "I hope I'm making you proud, Dad," he whispered. "One way or another, I'm going to finish what you started." The infiltration of Kazon space was a nerve-wracking dance of stealth and precision. Jack's team slipped past patrols and defensive grids, always one miscalculation away from discovery and death. They finally reached the heart of the Kazon Empire, a massive space station that served as Hydrus's seat of power. As they prepared for the final assault, Jack's second-in-command, Sarah, frowned at her scanner readings. "Sir, these energy signatures, they're off the charts. It's like nothing we've ever seen." Jack's gut tightened. "Stay alert. We don't know what we're walking into." They breached the station's defenses and fought their way through corridors filled with Kazon guards. But as they neared Hydrus's inner sanctum, the resistance suddenly stiffened. The team rounded a corner and found themselves face-to-face with towering Kazon warriors, their reflexes unnaturally fast, their strength clearly augmented. "Shit," Sarah breathed. "They're not normal Kazon." The battle that ensued was brutal. Jack watched in horror as his team was cut down one by one, their advanced weapons barely slowing the enhanced Kazon. Finally, only Jack remained, battered and bleeding. He stumbled into Hydrus's chamber, weapon raised. The Kazon Emperor stood waiting, a cruel smile on his face. Jack fired, but Hydrus moved with impossible speed, dodging the shot. "You really thought you could kill me?" Hydrus laughed. "I am the pinnacle of Kazon genetic engineering. You are nothing but an insect to be crushed." Jack's mind raced, searching for a way out. His eyes darted around the room, noting power conduits, structural weak points. What followed was a desperate game of cat and mouse. Jack used every trick he knew, every scrap of cover, every bit of tactical knowledge. He lured Hydrus into traps, used the environment against him, fought with every ounce of human ingenuity. In the end, it came down to a final, bold strategy. Jack overloaded his weapon, creating a localized EMP burst that momentarily disrupted Hydrus's augmentations. In that split second of vulnerability, Jack struck. His vibroblade found its mark, plunging deep into Hydrus's chest. But even as the Kazon Emperor fell, His hand slammed down on a control panel. "You've won nothing," Hydrus gasped. "My fleet comes for Earth. Now." Jack staggered back, his own wounds finally catching up with him. He could feel his life ebbing away, but the mission wasn't over. Somehow, he had to warn Earth. With the last of his strength, Jack dragged himself to Hydrus's command console. His vision blurred as he input the coordinates for an emergency jump. As alarms blared and Kazon troops converged on the chamber, Jack's fingers found the activation switch. In a flash of light, the station's command module tore free, hurtling through space towards Earth. Jack collapsed to the floor, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Hold on," he muttered to himself. "Just hold on." Jack Perry's stolen Kazan shuttle limped into human space, its hull scorched and systems failing. As it approached the nearest Earth outpost, alarms blared. Defense platforms locked on, ready to vaporize the alien craft. "Wait!" a sensor operator shouted. "I'm picking up a human life sign." The shuttle docked, and medics rushed in to find Jack unconscious, blood seeping from multiple wounds. They whisked him to the medbay as intelligence officers pored over the shuttle's databanks. "Sir, you need to see this," one said grimly, pulling up the files Jack had stolen. Earth's leaders gathered in an emergency war room, faces grim as they viewed the intel. Fleet Admiral Chen pounded his fist on the table. "Those bastards are coming for us with everything they've got." General Santos nodded. "Our new ships and weapons are good, but not good enough. Not for this." President Reyes stood, her voice steady. "Then we change the game. Operation Crucible is a go." Over the next weeks, every shipyard, factory, and lab on Earth worked around the clock. In the outer reaches of the solar system, massive fortifications took shape, a deadly maze of automated weapon platforms, minefields, and attack drones. On Mars, Dr. Alara Singh led a team of xenoarchaeologists in a race against time. They'd unearthed fragments of alien tech unlike anything they'd seen before. "If we can decode this," Alara muttered, "it might just save us all." As Earth prepared, covert ops teams struck Kazon border worlds. They hit communication relays, supply depots, anything to slow the coming onslaught. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, long-range sensors lit up. The Kazan Armada had arrived. Thousands of enemy ships poured out of hyperspace, a vast swarm of destruction bearing down on humanity's home. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the TSS Defiant, watching as the first Kazan ships entered the Crucible. "All units engage at will," he ordered. The outer defenses erupted, waves of missiles streaked out, joined by searing beams from mass driver cannons. Kazan ships exploded by the dozens, then hundreds. But still they came. Wave after remorseless wave pushed deeper into the Crucible. Human fortresses fell silent, overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Finally, the remnants of the Kazan vanguard broke through. The battered Terran fleet moved to engage. "We can't keep this up," Chen's XO said, watching another human destroyer vanish in nuclear fire. On Mars, Alara's team worked frantically to activate the alien device. They were humanity's last, desperate hope. The Crucible battle raged on, Earth's defenses crumbling under the relentless Kazan assault. In a dimly lit underground lab on Mars, Dr. Alara Singh's eyes widened as she deciphered the final sequence of alien glyphs. "We've done it," she shouted, her voice cracking with exhaustion and hope. "The weapon can be activated." But jubilation turned to despair as the power requirements flashed across her screen. General Santos cursed, smacking his head against the console. "We don't have anything that can generate that kind of energy," he growled. A weak voice crackled over the comm. "Yes, we do." Jack Perry struggled to sit up in his medbay bed, wincing as he pulled out IV lines. "The Singularity Reactor. It's our only shot." Minutes later, Jack stood before the sleek experimental craft housing the unstable reactor. His body ached, barely healed wounds threatening to reopen. He turned to face his assembled comrades, their faces etched with worry and resignation. "This is a one-way trip, son," Admiral Chen said softly. Jack nodded, swallowing hard. I know, but it's the only way. Sarah, his former second-in-command, stepped forward and hugged him fiercely. Give him hell, sir, she whispered, voice thick with emotion. With a final salute, Jack climbed into the cockpit. The ship's engines roared to life, catapulting him into the chaos of battle. Kazon fighters swarmed around him, energy bolts sizzling past the hull. Jack's hands flew over the controls, the ship dancing through the debris field. A staccato burst from his pulse cannons shredded an enemy fighter, but two more took its place. Come on, you bastards, Jack snarled, corkscrewing to avoid a barrage of missiles. The Martian surface loomed large in his view screen. Jack cut power to his engines, plummeting towards the planet in a controlled freefall. Kazon ships gave chase, only to be caught in the planet's gravity well and torn apart by the stress. Jack's ship slammed into the rusty soil, skidding to a halt before the towering alien structure. As he scrambled from the wreckage, the ground trembled. Kazon dropships screamed overhead, disgorging waves of troops. Jack sprinted for the weapons control nexus, Singularity reactor in tow. His lungs burned as he raced up ancient steps, the air thin and cold. Behind him, the first Kazon warriors crested the ridge, energy weapons spitting death. Inside the control chamber, Jack's hands flew over alien consoles, following Dr. Singh's hastily transmitted instructions. The Singularity reactor hummed ominously as he connected it to the ancient power grid. A bolt of energy struck the ground at Jack's feet, showering him with molten rock. He dove behind a column as Kazon troops poured into the chamber. Now or never, Jack muttered, slamming his hand down on the activation switch. The chamber filled with blinding light. Jack felt the floor lurch beneath him as the entire structure vibrated with unleashed power. A keening wail rose to a deafening crescendo, and then silence. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a lance of pure energy erupted from the heart of the weapon, punching through the Martian atmosphere and into space. Jack watched in awe as the beam carved through the Kazon armada, vaporizing capital ships in an instant. But the beam didn't stop. It swept across the battlefield, annihilating friend and foe alike. Jack's eyes widened in horror as he realized the weapon couldn't be controlled. A final, cataclysmic pulse of energy burst outward. The control chamber collapsed around Jack as the ground itself buckled and heaved. In the eerie calm that followed, the tattered remnants of both fleets drifted in silence. Aboard his battered shuttle, Emperor Hydras's eyes snapped open, burning with hatred. He rose unsteadily, summoning his surviving commanders. Prepare for the final assault, Hydras growled, his voice rough with pain and fury. We will crush these humans once and for all. The remnants of the Kazon armada hung in Earth's orbit like a swarm of angry wasps. Emperor Hydras stood on the bridge of his flagship, his fists clenched as he surveyed the battered blue planet below. Prepare for ground assault, he snarled. We'll crush these humans with our bare hands if we must. On the cratered European continent, Kazon dropships screamed through the atmosphere. They touched down in the ruins of Berlin, disgorging waves of infantry, battle mechs, and artillery. The invaders swarmed through the shattered cityscape, establishing fortified positions among the rubble. In Earth's orbit, Jack Perry stood before a holographic display of the unfolding invasion. His body still ached from his wounds, but his eyes burned with intensity. All units, this is it, he announced over the comm. Operation Thunderfall is go. Hit them hard, hit them fast. The sky above Berlin lit up as thousands of Terran drop pods punched through the cloud cover. Anti-aircraft fire filled the air, a deadly web of plasma bolts and tracer rounds. Many pods were blown apart, their occupants vaporized in an instant. But for each one destroyed, 10 more made it through. The pods slammed into the ground with earth-shaking force. Their sides blew open and Terran soldiers poured out, weapons blazing. Armored vehicles rolled from larger pods, their engines roaring as they charged into the fray. The battle devolved into chaos. Kazon and human forces clashed in the narrow streets and bombed out buildings. The air filled with the scream of energy weapons and the staccato chatter of projectile guns. Private Alex Chen ducked behind a crumbling wall as plasma bolts sizzled overhead. He popped up, firing his rifle in short, controlled bursts. A Kazan warrior fell, its chest smoking. "Move up!" Chen's sergeant bellowed. The squad advanced, leapfrogging from cover to cover. A Kazan battle mech stomped around the corner, its massive plasma cannon glowing with building energy. Chen's blood ran cold. Suddenly, the mech's head exploded in a shower of sparks and metal. A Terran gunship swooped low overhead, its chin-mounted railgun still smoking. In his orbital command center, Jack received updates from across the battlefield. The situation was grim. Neither side could gain the upper hand. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "Kazan Command and Control is operating from a fortified bunker in Sector 7. Jack nodded. "Deploy Wraith Team. Take out their command structure." The Earth Force commandos of Wraith Team slipped through the war-torn streets of Berlin. They moved like ghosts, their adaptive camouflage rendering them nearly invisible. They breached the Kazan bunker with shaped charges, storming inside in a blur of precision and violence. Within minutes, they'd fought their way to the command center. Sergeant Sarah Reeves stood over the body of the Kazan chief strategist, her vibroblade dripping alien blood. "Wraith actual to command," she reported. "Package secured. Kazan leadership neutralized." Jack allowed himself a grim smile. "Good work, Wraith. All units, prepare for Operation Hellstorm." Terran artillery pieces began launching specialized shells into Kazan-held territory. The shells burst in mid-air, releasing clouds of fuel-air explosive bomblets. The bomblets ignited, and Berlin became an inferno. Entire city blocks vanished in the conflagration. Kazan soldiers screamed as they were consumed by the unnatural fire. But the aliens weren't finished. A swarm of cloaked fighters descended from orbit, led by Emperor Hydrus himself. They tore through the Terran air defenses, obliterating gunships and fighters with ruthless efficiency. Jack watched in horror as his air support crumbled. "Activate Lazarus Protocol," he ordered. Deep beneath the ruins of Berlin, hidden weapon emplacements whirred to life. A web of railguns and mass drivers, their barrels protruding from rubble and abandoned buildings. As Hydrus's fleet moved to secure air superiority, the guns opened fire. Hypersonic slugs and relativistic projectiles filled the sky, ripping through Kazan shields with minimal resistance. Hydrus's flagship took a direct hit to its engines. The massive warship spun out of control, trailing fire and debris. It plummeted towards the ground, disappearing behind the skyline. The remaining Kazan ships scattered, their formation shattered. Without air support, their ground forces were cut off and surrounded. Jack leaned forward, studying the tactical display. The battle hung in the balance, a precarious stalemate that could tip either way. The twisted wreckage of Emperor Hydrus's flagship loomed over the shattered Berlin skyline. Inside, the Kazan leader snarled as he surveyed the damage reports. Terran defensive cannons had the ship surrounded, their barrels tracking every movement. "Enough," Hydrus spat. "We break out, now." His Praetorian guards snapped to attention, their eyes glowing with cybernetic enhancements. They hefted weapons that pulsed with alien energy, more extensions of their augmented bodies than mere tools. The ship's hull split open. Hydrus and his elite warriors leapt into the chaos below, their augmented physiology allowing them to survive the bone-crushing fall. They hit the ground running, carving a path of destruction through the rubble-choked streets. Jack Perry's voice crackled over the comms. "All units, this is Perry. Hydrus is on the move. Converge on my position." Jack's strike team raced through the ruins, plasma rifles at the ready. They rounded a corner and came face to face with the Kazan assault. Energy bolts sizzled past Jack's head as he dove for cover. "Suppressing fire!" he shouted. The air filled with the staccato chatter of human weaponry. A Praetorian guard stumbled, its chest a smoking ruin, only to rise again as nanomachines knitted its flesh back together. Jack gritted his teeth. "Fall back! Funnel them towards the Reichstag!" The strike team retreated, drawing the Kazan into a deadly game of cat and mouse through Berlin's war-torn streets. Rubble shifted underfoot, jagged chunks of concrete and twisted rebar threatening to trip them at every step. Finally, they reached the bombed-out shell of the Reichstag. Jack's team took up defensive positions as Hydrus and his guards approached. "Light 'em up!" Jack roared. A hail of bullets, plasma bolts, and micro-missiles slammed into the Kazon. The onslaught would have annihilated any normal force. But Hydrus stood tall, his biomechanical body absorbing impossible amounts of damage. The Emperor laughed, a cold and terrible sound. Is this the best humanity can offer? Jack watched in horror as his team's firepower proved ineffective. One by one, his soldiers fell to the unstoppable Kazon counterattack. "Structural charges!" Jack yelled, desperation creeping into his voice. "Bring it down!" Explosions rocked the ancient building. Tons of debris crashed down, burying Hydrus and his guards under a mountain of rubble. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the pile of wreckage began to shift. Hydrus emerged, his body regenerating even as he climbed from the ruins. His eyes locked onto Jack, burning with alien hatred. Jack looked down at his armor's readouts. The fusion reactor pulsed, ready for one final devastating act. "Not today, you bastard!" Jack growled. He lunged at Hydrus, grappling with the alien tyrant. Jack's fingers found the reactor's fail-safe controls. "For Earth," he whispered. The world went white. A miniature sun bloomed in the heart of Berlin, vaporizing everything within its reach. When the light faded, only 2 smoking craters remained where Jack and Hydrus had stood. In orbit, the Kazan fleet hung motionless. Without Hydrus, their will to fight evaporated. Across the ruined Earth, battered defenders looked to the sky, scarcely daring to hope. A message crackled across all frequencies. "This is Kazan High Command. We request terms for cessation of hostilities." Cheers erupted from every corner of the globe. Humanity had done the impossible. They had stood against the might of an interstellar empire and emerged victorious. But the cost had been unimaginable. As the ceasefire took hold, the true scope of the devastation became clear. Billions dead. Entire cities reduced to ash. The wounds inflicted by this war would take generations to heal. In what remained of the United Nations building, Earth's leaders gathered to plan the monumental task of rebuilding. They worked tirelessly, driven by the memory of those who had sacrificed everything for this chance. Then, as humanity dared to look to the future once more, a chilling report arrived from the edges of settled space. The Nova Centauri colony had gone dark. Then, Epsilon Eridani. Then, Wolf 359. Something was coming, something that made the Kazan look like a mere prelude. In the war rooms and briefing centers of Earth, grim-faced men and women pored over the reports. They knew the stakes. They had stared into the abyss of extinction once before. Now they would do so again. The acrid smell of ozone and melted circuitry filled the air as Stephen Perry strode through the ruins of Terran High Command. Technicians scrambled to repair shattered consoles, their faces drawn with exhaustion. Stephen's boots crunched over broken glass as he approached Admiral Chen, who stood hunched over a flickering holographic display. "Another colony's gone dark," Chen said, his voice hollow. "Nova Proxima, that's the 5th one this week." Stephen leaned in, studying the map. Red dots littered the outer systems, each representing a silent world. "Any response to our probes?" Chen shook his head. "Nothing. It's like they've been wiped clean." A young ensign burst into the room, datapad clutched in trembling hands. "Sir, we've lost contact with Epsilon Eridani." Stephen's blood ran cold. Epsilon Eridani was no backwater outpost. It was a major industrial hub, home to millions. For it to go dark. "This is no coincidence," Stephen said, his heart made. "Something's out there and it's coming for us." Admiral Chen nodded grimly. "I'm authorizing a recon mission. We need eyes on the ground." "I'll lead it," Stephen said without hesitation. Hours later, Stephen stood in the hangar bay of the TCS Horizon, surrounded by his hand-picked team of Pathfinders. Their armor gleamed under the harsh lights, weapons primed and ready. Listen up, Stephen called out. We're jumping into the unknown. Whatever did this to our colonies, it's like nothing we've faced before. Stay sharp, stay alive. The team piled into their dropship, engines whining as they lifted off. Stephen felt the familiar lurch as they jumped to FTL, hurtling towards the edge of known space. Days later, they dropped out of hyperspace above Miramar, an icebound world on the periphery of human territory. The planet's surface was a blank white canvas, marred only by the geometric shapes of human habitation. Life signs? Stephen asked as they entered low orbit. Negative, replied Corporal Zhang, her eyes fixed on the sensor readouts. But I'm picking up residual heat signatures from the main colony complex. They touched down on the outskirts of New Anchorage, Miramar's capital. The city stood silent, buildings half buried in windswept snow. There were no bodies, no signs of battle, just an eerie, absolute stillness. Stephen led his team through empty streets, the only sound the crunch of their boots on ice. They reached the colony's central plaza, dominated by a massive dome structure. Fan out, Stephen ordered. Check for survivors, any clues to what happened here. As his team dispersed, Stephen approached the dome's main entrance. The airlock cycled open at his touch, revealing a cavernous interior. He stepped inside, activating his helmet lights. A scream cut through the comm channel. Contact! We've got... The transmission devolved into static. Stephen sprinted back outside, weapon raised. He found Corporal Zhang kneeling beside a twisted form half buried in the snow. As Stephen drew closer, his stomach lurched. It was unmistakably human, but warped, flesh seared by some impossible energy. What could do this? Zhang whispered. Before Stephen could answer, a low rumble shook the ground. In the distance, something vast and alien rose from beneath the ice, blotting out the stars. Stephen's comm crackled to life, filled with panicked voices from across human space. The silence had been broken, and humanity's worst nightmare was only beginning. The stealth frigate Shadowblade dropped out of hyperspace, its hull crackling with residual energy. Stephen Perry gripped the command console, his eyes fixed on the swirling toxic atmosphere of Praxis below. Sensors are clear, reported Lieutenant Vega, her voice tight. No sign the xenofauna have detected us. Stephen nodded. Deploy stealth armor, weapons hot. The Shadowblade's hull shimmered as layers of experimental composite activated, bending light and energy around the ship. They plunged into Praxis's corrosive atmosphere, alarms blaring as the outer hull temperature spiked. 30 seconds to landing zone, called out the pilot. Through the viewports, Stephen saw writhing masses of bioorganic material coating the planet's surface. Tendrils the size of skyscrapers reached for the sky, pulsing with alien life. The ship touched down on a rare patch of bare rock. Stephen turned to his team, a dozen of Earth's finest soldiers, each clad in cutting-edge armor. Remember the mission, he said. We find the core, we plant the charges, we get out, watch for biosignatures. These things adapt fast. They exited the ship, boots crunching on crystallized alien growth. The air stank of rotting meat and ozone. In the distance, something massive moved, obscured by toxic fog. Movement, 2 o'clock, shouted Corporal Chen. A creature burst from the mist, all tentacles and teeth, easily the size of a small building. Its flesh rippled, sprouting new limbs, even as it charged. Open fire! Plasma bolts seared the air. The monster shrieked, its flesh bubbling and reforming around the wounds. It lashed out, a tentacle catching Private Rodriguez and yanking him into the air. Stephen's rifle hummed as he emptied an entire clip into the thing's central mass. It collapsed with a wet splat, dissolving into a puddle of goo. Rodriguez? Stephen called. No response. Keep moving, he ordered, tamping down the guilt. We don't have much time. They pressed on, fighting through waves of ever-evolving horrors. Each encounter left them with fewer men, fewer resources. Stephen's armor was scarred and smoking, barely holding together. Finally, they reached a vast pit in the planet's surface. At its center stood a pulsating organic spire, easily a mile high. That's it, Stephen said. The core. They descended into the pit, fighting off swarms of flying monstrosities. The walls were lined with cocoon-like structures, each containing a twisted human form. At the base of the spire, they found a cluster of survivors, emaciated, eyes wild with pain and terror. "Oh God," whispered Vega. "What did they do to them?" A familiar face caught Stephen's eye. His heart clenched. "Sarah," he breathed, approaching his sister's broken form. Her eyes focused on him, a flicker of recognition in their depths. "Steve, please, end it." The ground shook. The spire began to pulse faster, tendrils of alien flesh reaching out. "It's waking up," Stephen realized. He turned to his remaining team. "Plant the charges, now!" As they worked, Stephen knelt beside his sister. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything." Sarah managed a weak smile. "Just make it count, little brother." The charges were set. Stephen looked at the titanic alien form stirring above them, a nightmare made flesh. "Fire in the hole," he said, and pressed the detonator. The world went white. Heat beyond imagining washed over them. Stephen felt the ground give way beneath his feet as the complex collapsed. He fell into darkness, the screams of his team and the dying xenofauna core ringing in his ears. Stephen Perry's eyes widened in horror as the sensor readouts flickered to life. The impossible had happened. The xenofauna core had survived. "All ships, battle stations," he barked into the comms. "This isn't over." The bridge of the TCS Horizon erupted into frantic activity. Klaxons blared as crew members rushed to their posts, faces drawn with exhaustion and fear. On the main view screen, the blasted surface of Praxis writhed with new life. Towering spires of alien biomass erupted from the planet's crust, pulsing with sickly energy. "What the hell are those things?" Lieutenant Vega asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Stephen could respond, a priority alert flashed across his console. He felt the blood drain from his face as he read the report. "Recon drones have detected a breach," he announced. "They're coming." The crew watched in stunned silence as the first wave of xenofauna bioforms burst through Praxis's atmosphere. They were nightmares given flesh, grotesque winged monstrosities that defied description. Their bodies shifted and mutated even as they flew, adapting to every threat. "Open fire!" Stephen roared. The remnants of the Terran fleet unleashed everything they had. Plasma beams lanced out, carving glowing furrows through the swarm. Missile salvos detonated in blinding flashes, vaporizing dozens of aliens. But for every xenofauna creature destroyed, hundreds more took its place. The bioforms shrugged off damage that would have annihilated any natural life form, their cells regenerating faster than they could be destroyed. Stephen's hands flew over his tactical display. "Concentrate fire on their leading edge. We have to slow them down." The space above Praxis became an inferno of thermonuclear fire. Every ship in the fleet emptied its magazines, hurling an apocalyptic barrage into the surging tide of alien flesh. For a moment it seemed to work. Whole sections of the xenofauna swarm vanished in atomic fury. But the onslaught was relentless. More and more bioforms poured from the planet's surface, an endless stream of evolutionary nightmares. "Sir," Vega called out, "they're approaching escape velocity." Stephen's mind raced. There was only one option left, and it was beyond desperate. "All ships, this is Admiral Perry," he transmitted. "Prepare for singularity implosion. Channel all reactor output into a directed gravitonic pulse." A chorus of acknowledgments echoed across the comms. Stephen took a deep breath, knowing what he was about to do would likely doom them all. "On my mark, now." A wave of pure gravitic force erupted from the Terran ships. It slammed into the xenofauna swarm with unimaginable power, twisting space itself. Thousands of alien monstrosities were torn apart in an instant. But it wasn't enough. Even as the energy wave ripped through their ranks, the lead elements of the xenofauna vanguard breached the singularity horizon. In a flash of impossible light, they vanished into hyperspace, bound for Earth. Stephen slumped in his chair, the awful realization settling over him. They had failed. The xenofauna were loose in the galaxy once more, and there was nothing he could do to stop them. With trembling hands, he keyed in the emergency transmission. Earth had to be warned. It was their last hope. "This is Admiral Stephen Perry to Earth High Command," he began, his voice hoarse. "Xenofauna containment has failed. I repeat, containment has failed. Multiple hostiles inbound via jump corridors. Prepare for immediate saturation bombardment of European and West Asian sectors. May God have mercy on us all." As the message streaked across light years, Stephen turned to face his battered crew. They looked to him, waiting for orders, for hope, for anything. "We're not done yet," he said, forcing steel into his voice. "As long as we draw breath, we fight. For Earth, for humanity. Now let's figure out how to get home and finish this." The bridge crew straightened, a flicker of grit returning to their eyes. They had one last chance to save their world, and they would not go quietly into the night.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.